Tonight, not one, not two, not three, but four.
The defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Backlash from Donald Trump and his supporters after a fourth criminal indictment against the former Republican president. And courting evangelicals.
I think Iowa's going to be wide open.
CBN News hits the campaign trail in the Hawkeye state. Plus, crisis in Sudan.
The situation there is very dire.
Civil war engulfs the Sudanese capital in Darfur. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A new indictment with claims of an effort to steal the 2020 election culminates in 41 criminal charges. Tonight from the CBN headquarters in Virginia Beach, I'm John Jessup. Welcome to Faith Nation. Well, former President Donald Trump defiantly on the defensive tonight after being accused of heading a criminal enterprise in a sweeping grand jury indictment in Georgia. Mr. Trump and 18 others face charges of illegally working to overturn votes that resulted in him losing the Peach State in 2020 as he sought a second term. CBN's Hillary Powell is following the latest. Hillary, the Georgia indictment charges Trump with 13 criminal counts, but can you say more about this attempt by prosecutors to use a statute that's normally associated with mobsters?
John, Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis turned to what's known as a RICO statute. That stands for Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations, and it accuses the former president of being part of a criminal enterprise to keep him in power. Now, this indictment is also unique because a state charge is unpardonable by any president. No other former or sitting president has ever been indicted. This case adds to Trump's already growing legal issues.
It didn't take the former president long to speak out after the announcement that he and 18 co-defendants face charges of conspiring to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. Taking to his Truth Social platform, former President Trump writes he plans to present new evidence of election fraud in Georgia that he claims will cause a complete exoneration. This nearly 100-page indictment presents dozens of acts by Trump or his allies to undo his defeat in the 2020 Georgia election results.
The defendants engaged in a criminal racketeering enterprise to overturn Georgia's presidential election result.
Charged under Georgia's Racketeering Act, there could be no pardon by a president or governor in case of a conviction. Willis's probe sparked in part by Trump's phone call to Georgia Secretary of State, where the former president appeared to pressure Brad Raffensperger to find the votes needed to win.
I just want to find 11,780 votes.
President Joe Biden did not respond to questions Tuesday while boarding Marine One, and there's been no official response from Republican Senate leadership on the latest indictment. It's the fourth indictment for Trump, as polling still shows him to be the GOP 2024 frontrunner. In all the cases, the former president denies any wrongdoing, calling them politically motivated. Mark Caleb Smith, director of the Center for Political Studies at Cedarville University, says he doesn't anticipate Trump's political base will see this latest legal hit bruising his bid for re-election. Smith does warn that Trump's outspoken nature may cause an issue for prosecutors.
I think that's a real fear for the prosecutors, not only in Georgia, but at the federal level and in New York as well, that President Trump is really trying to taint whatever jury pool we're going to end up with in these legal proceedings.
Under Georgia law, the grand jury issued arrest warrants for everyone charged. Fulton County District Attorney Fonnie Willis says Trump and the other 18 defendants have until noon Eastern on August 25th to voluntarily surrender.
Well, Hillary, what more can you tell us about what's next as far as the racketeering case with so many defendants, 19 total?
Yeah, District Attorney Willis said in a news conference this week that she plans to try Trump and all 18 defendants together.
And Hillary, what about the timing in all of this? When can we see this potentially go to trial?
Well, Trump has 5 trials scheduled between now and May, and he's also busy still on the campaign trail, fundraising around this theme that he is a target and he's portraying himself as a victim of Democratic prosecutors who are out to get him. And for now, Trump says he will speak out at a press conference set for Monday. John.
And it has been a fundraising boon. Hillary Powell in Washington, thank you so very much for that report. Well, despite growing legal issues, the former president still holds a commanding lead in the GOP primaries. While current polling indicates he might be unstoppable, White House correspondent Abigail Robertson found someone, a prominent evangelical leader actually, in the nation's first caucus state, who says he's hearing a different story than the polls are telling.
Conservative evangelicals played a key role in sending President Trump to the White House in 2016. While he delivered on many policy promises, his demeanor this time around remains a challenge for the values-based voting bloc. That leaves 2024 GOP candidates hopeful there's an opportunity to chip away at the frontrunner's evangelical support.
I think Iowa's going to be wide open. I do think it's very open to defeat Donald Trump.
Bob Vander Plaats, CEO and president of the Family Leader, is also known as the GOP kingmaker in Iowa. He's casting serious doubts on Trump's 26-point lead in the state.
I don't see anything on the ground that supports that wide of a margin in the polls.
Vander Plaats successfully predicted the last 3 Iowa GOP caucus winners. He tells CBN News he'll determine at Thanksgiving whether or not he'll endorse, and believes evangelical voters are focused on one key issue.
Who can win in 2024? And I would say that's more of a priority this go around than before.
Former Vice President Mike Pence is one of the 2024 contenders, hoping to stand out in the crowd for evangelical voters.
I hope people see me as the most consistent, proven conservative in this race.
CBN News spoke to Pence in Iowa after a religious liberty summit held with leaders of Christian colleges around the country.
I think the challenge today with a changing culture is to ensure that we are defending the right of religious education in America. The First Amendment protects the freedom of religion in this country. And as President of the United States, I'll be appointing judges to our courts at every level that'll uphold religious liberty.
Pence tells CBN News he believes he's well known, but not known well.
When people know me as that loyal vice president standing beside the president, through a consequential administration. I was always loyal to President Donald Trump until my oath to the Constitution required me to do otherwise.
Recent polls have Pence polling around 3% in Iowa, and some voters greet him with a cool reception.
You're a traitor!
Pence often defends his actions, certifying President Joe Biden's election victory on January 6, 2020.
I mean, the American people deserve to know that the president asked me to choose him over my oath to the Constitution, but I chose the Constitution, and I always will.
Iowa voters are hearing him out.
We had a little bit of concern about how he handled his time with Trump in the office. But I think the more I hear, the more he did. He was loyal to him.
But Vander Plaats lists Pence as just one of many candidates pulling voters away from the current GOP frontrunner.
They're all making a play for that lane. And they're all doing a good job because they're here a lot, they're shaking the hands, they're looking people in the eye. And that's part of the battle. You got to show up.
With many Iowa evangelicals saying they're open to someone besides Trump, the state's January caucus will be the first official indicator of whether evangelical voters will indeed move on from the former president. Reporting from Iowa, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Thank you, Abby. And with that, let's bring in Chief Political Analyst David Brody. David, I know you've interviewed Bob Vander Plaats many times over the years. You know him well. He said that he wanted, in Iowa, voters are looking for conservative Christian statesmen. So do you share his view that Trump's lock on Iowa isn't a surefire thing?
I don't really share his view on this, John. Now, he knows Iowa a whole lot better than me. The only thing I know well are buffet lines, trust me. But look, I think ultimately, look at the math here. I mean, Donald Trump is up by quite a bit in poll after poll, even in Iowa. And so even if someone catches fire, do they have enough firepower to catch Donald Trump? Maybe a Tim Scott, potentially a Nikki Haley, but Mike Pence, 3%. Chris Christie, please, New Hampshire is his battlefield. And everybody else, I mean, Vivek Ramaswamy is doing well, but I don't think he's going to play as well in Iowa than in other states. So you put it all together, and I just don't quite see it. But I do think that Trump will have a battle in Iowa for sure.
I don't know, David. Vivek Ramaswamy's rapping abilities, that might put him over the top. David, let's get to the big story. Former President Trump has until Friday next week to surrender to the Fulton County Sheriff's Office for his 4th criminal indictment. He's, of course, called the indictment a witch hunt. He's also scheduled a news conference on Monday that says will exonerate him. David, beyond how this just impacts President Trump and the campaign, tell me how this 4th indictment will impact the state of American politics going forward.
John, it's a great question. We've been down a dangerous road before. I believe this feels generational, John, in a bad way. We've talked about this before, that we live in an ideological civil war. We live in a political civil war. We live in all sorts of an informational civil war. I'm very concerned the way this country is going. And look, this is the danger, John, and this is the problem with the indictment, if you will. I mean, Donald Trump did not believe the election was won fair and square. He objected to it. He continued to object. People wanted him to stop. They said, it's over. You've lost, Donald Trump. And he said, no, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? Have you looked at this? I don't believe I've lost. And the government is now putting him on trial for believing that. It's called free speech, John. It's called free speech. But they're trying to make it racketeering charges, a RICO, the John Gotti of politics, a criminal enterprise. And I think when we go down that route, we're in a very dangerous place in America. Let me just give you one example. One of the indictment charges in there against Donald Trump, of all people, when he called Mike Pence a wimp for not certifying the election. For he didn't want to certify the election, and he called Mike Pence a wimp. Fannie Willis called that in the indictment an actual overt act of conspiracy. How in the world is that an overt act of conspiracy? So we're getting into freedom of speech. I think eventually this all goes to the Supreme Court, John.
All right, David Brody, you finished right on time. Chief Political Analyst David Brody, appreciate your time and your insights.
You bet.
Well, turning now to mounting frustration in Maui, where hundreds are still missing as hope of rescues meet the grim reality of more recovered bodies. Some 100 people were killed in last week's devastating Hawaii wildfires. The blaze razed nearly 3,000 buildings, torching entire neighborhoods. Hawaiian officials are urging locals to have patience as their search continues, but the hope of finding survivors is beginning to fade.
It's going to be emotionally catastrophic.
I understand that people want numbers. It's not a numbers game. It's not just ash on your clothing when you take it off. It's our loved ones.
Hawaii's Attorney General has opened an investigation into why sirens on the island were not activated, even as wildfires tore through the town at a rate of a mile a minute. Coming up, the first anniversary of the Inflation Reduction Act, how the American economy has changed 1 year after the administration's landmark issue. Welcome back. Tomorrow marks 1 year since the Inflation Reduction Act became law. And though record high rates of inflation are measurably down, economists say the massive bill had little to do with it. Today, though, the president took to Milwaukee to make the case that the law, coupled with Bidenomics, is investing in America to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down.
Since I took office, I've seen more than $3 billion in private investment in clean energy manufacturing all across Wisconsin. That's Bidenomics. That's investing in America.
Democrats are hoping the infrastructure bill will generate political headwinds as the campaign season kicks off. Well, with that, we are now joined by Joel Griffith, an economist with the Heritage Foundation. Joel, welcome. So the White House is engaged in full court press to take political ownership of the economy, while polling shows most voters are unsatisfied. Joel, if the economy is strong come 2024, do you think that gamble could eventually pay off?
No, this gamble will not pay off, and that's because the so-called Inflation Reduction Act actually results in even more deficit spending. The core components of this include an extension of Obamacare subsidies, hundreds of billions of dollars of Green New Deal subsidies for wind turbines, solar panels, electric vehicles, and batteries. It actually includes a big tax hike on businesses via a tax buyback program, and not to mention tens of billions of dollars for tens of thousands of new audits that will target small business owners. This is the last thing that our already weak economy needed. And if you look back for the last 2 years, families have seen about a $6,000 a year real pay cut because of inflation. And this bill that Biden is celebrating will only make things worse.
Joel, inflation has managed to tick down as a result of the Federal Reserve's continued interest rate hikes. What do you think is next when it comes to interest rates?
Well, inflation is still running at close to 4% annually year over year. That's about double what we've experienced long term. So the year over year price hikes are not as large as they were, say, a year ago, but we're still running at about double the long term average. And the Federal Reserve, let's remember, the Federal Reserve is to blame for this. The Federal Reserve worked hand in hand with politicians from both political parties the last few years to fund this massive explosion in government spending. And now they're trying their best to mitigate the damage, but they caused this problem. It's time to reform the Federal Reserve, stop their ability to print limitless amounts of money, and Republicans and Democrats in Congress need to get together and actually stop this spending spree. President Trump and Congress under him started this explosion in spending. President Biden has made it even worse. It's a disaster long term, and we're actually feeling the impacts of it right now.
Joel, what do you recommend as far as ways to reform the Federal Reserve? You just mentioned that both parties are responsible. You talked about stop spending or printing money. What else can be done, and is there the willpower to actually bring reform to the Federal Reserve?
Well, sure. Well, let's look at what the Federal Reserve has done the last several years. It's not just that they printed money to buy up government bonds, which then are unleashed into the marketplace, driving up prices. The Federal Reserve also printed up several $1 trillion to buy mortgage-backed securities. And that inflated home prices. It's a big part of the reason why housing affordability right now, it's never been worse. It takes almost 1/2 of a typical person's paycheck just to afford the mortgage on a standard house. That's about double the burden of what we've known to be historically true. The Federal Reserve, in large part, is responsible for that. And also, now it appears the Fed has the power to buy up even corporate debt, which you end up running zombie companies as money flows to firms that really should not have access to that capital.
Joel, we have just run out of time. I apologize for getting you cranked up. Joel Griffith with the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Well, accusations of war crimes during deadly infighting in Sudan as violence rages. When we come back, a look at how some say God is still moving amid it all. Welcome back. Mass civilian murders and sexual assaults. That's the situation unfolding in Sudan as rival military and rebel forces fight for control of the government. The nation's top army general went on TV Monday night with new claims of war crimes against his foes, though Amnesty International accuses both sides of such atrocities. Senior international correspondent George Thomas reports as the terror unfolds in Sudan, Christians are risking their lives to help their fellow countrymen.
One leads Sudan's army as the country's de facto leader. The other, a notorious rebel leading a powerful paramilitary force. Once allies, these two Sudanese generals have been fighting for months to control one of Africa's most strategic countries.
I don't know any family that hasn't been affected by this, hasn't been impacted. Pastors, church community leaders, they've all had to flee.
For 10 years, Tina Ramirez sought to advance human rights and religious freedom in this predominantly Muslim country. She worries all of that may be in jeopardy now as civil war engulfs the country.
The situation there is very dire. Churches have been bombed and attacked and looted, so have mosques and other places of worship.
Fighting between General Burhan's army and General Dagalo's rebel rapid support force has left at least 3,000 people dead and 12,000 more wounded. According to human rights experts, the situation in the western Sudan region of Darfur is particularly horrific, with reports of rebel fighters going on a killing spree.
The bodies of at least 87 ethnic Masalit and others allegedly killed last month by rapid support forces and their allied militia in West Darfur have been buried in a mass grave.
Using thermal detection data from NASA satellite images, Yale University's Conflict Observatory found those fighters deliberately targeted at least 26 communities in Darfur, burning down entire neighborhoods and villages.
A lot of this is ethnic, a lot of this is tribal, and there is absolutely some targeted violence.
Mike Congrove leads Empower One, a ministry training Sudanese Christians to start churches. Congrove says Christians from different denominations and parachurch groups in Darfur are working together despite enormous risks.
We're really seeing some great cooperation to make sure guys are okay, men and women are okay, that folks who need to get out are able to escape and getting some support that they need.
Nearly 3 million people have been displaced within the country. Another 800,000 have escaped to neighboring countries like Chad, South Sudan, Egypt, and Ethiopia.
As they are trying to flee the city into the Nuba Mountains, part of South Sudan, over into Chad and other areas, the streets are lined with dead bodies.
Meanwhile, the UN says the country's healthcare infrastructure is collapsing, with 80% of the hospitals now out of service.
Hospitals have been taken over by the RSF and these other forces. The medical supplies have been targeted and attacked. Medical workers have been attacked.
Congrove's group has set up aid distribution points close to the Sudanese border for the thousands streaming out of the country. He's asking people around the world to pray for a ceasefire, and especially for those who've decided to stay and help their countrymen.
And I just was on a call over the weekend with a key leader in Darfur, and he said, I want to keep reaching people for Christ. And he's someone who hasn't left, and a lot of people have. And he's intentionally staying in and surrounded by fighting, and he's asking for prayer.
George Thomas, CBN News.
Finally tonight, turning 100 marks an amazing milestone, basically giving anyone the occasion to become a centenarian. Add another 10 years, though, and you're a super centenarian. But one Texas woman set her sights a little higher, becoming the oldest person living in the Lone Star State. I want you to meet Elizabeth Francis. She just turned 114, making her the second oldest person in the United States and the 7th oldest in the world. 5 generations of Elizabeth's family gathered to mark this special occasion. Francis says she gives thanks to the Lord for her long life. We want to thank you for watching Faith Nation. Have a great night.